She stepped off the train into a town full of strangers. No groom, no welcome, nothing but a crowd of people who looked at her like she was already someone else's problem. They said she was too old, too plain, too late for anything worth having out here. And she stood there in the burning sun with one suitcase and $14 and nowhere to go, thinking maybe they were right. Then a 6-year-old girl walked out of that crowd, looked her straight in the eyes, and said in front of everyone, "That's her. That's my mama." The whole street went silent. She had never seen this child before in her life. What happened next would change both of them forever and shake an entire town to its foundation. Stay until the end, because this story doesn't go where you think it will. If it moves you, hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join our family so you never miss what comes next. The train didn't slow the way Clara expected it to. It shuddered, groaned along its iron spine, and finally halted with a sound like something giving up, a long, exhausted sigh that matched her own. She sat in the second-to-last car, the one that smelled of coal smoke and other people's lunches, and she pressed her face briefly against the window glass before pulling back. The town outside was brown. Everything was brown. The buildings, the road, the faces of the men standing on the platform with their arms crossed and their hats pulled low. Even the sky seemed to have given up on color, bleached pale by a sun that showed no interest in kindness. Red Hollow, Wyoming Territory. Population: however many people it took to make a woman feel completely unwelcome. Clara Whitmore was 34 years old. She knew exactly what that meant to the world, or at least to this particular corner of it. She had passed the age where people assumed her life was still ahead of her. She was in the age where they assumed she'd already made her mistakes and was still paying for them. She had a face that had been pretty once and was now something else, not ruined, not aged beyond recognition, but settled, honest. The kind of face that had seen enough to stop pretending. She gathered her bag from the overhead shelf. One suitcase, $14 folded into the lining of her coat. A letter. The letter was from a man named William Pratt, a rancher in Red Hollow, who had responded to her advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette 6 months ago. He had written 3 times. His handwriting was careful, almost formal, and his words were plain. He needed a wife who could manage a household. He had a modest property. He was a man of steady habits. He never claimed to be in love with her. Clara appreciated that. She had been lied to by men who claimed to be in love with her. Steady habits sounded considerably better than hollow poetry. She had written back. She had agreed. She had sold the last of her furniture, packed what remained of her life into one battered suitcase, and boarded the train in Cincinnati with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not exactly hope, more like the absence of dread. A direction. A reason to move forward instead of simply standing still. She stepped off the train onto the platform. The sun hit her face like a door being slammed. She blinked, adjusted her hat, and looked around. There were maybe 15 people on the platform. Some were waiting for packages, others for relatives. A station master in a red vest was arguing with a porter about a crate of chickens. 2 children ran between people's legs until their mother snagged one by the collar. Nobody was holding a sign with her name. Nobody was looking for her. She waited. The passengers around her collected their bags and dispersed. Greetings happened. Hugs, handshakes, the brief and wordless reunion of people who had missed each other. Clara watched it all from where she stood, her suitcase at her feet, her letter in her coat pocket, the platform slowly emptying around her. 10 minutes, 20. The train gave a final lurch and began to pull away from the station, heading west without her. She stayed where she was. "You waiting on somebody?" The station master had appeared beside her, a short, broad man with a red face and suspicious eyes. "William Pratt," she said. "He was supposed to meet me here." Something moved across the man's expression. Not quite pity. Something closer to uncomfortable recognition. "Pratt," he repeated. "Yes. Do you know him?" The station master rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma'am," he said carefully. "William Pratt left Red Hollow about 3 weeks ago, took his mule and his wagon and headed north. Word was he found himself a younger woman up in Laramie." He paused. "I'm sorry. I figured maybe you knew." Clara did not say anything for a moment. She looked at the empty tracks where the train had been. Then she looked at the letter in her hand. She'd taken it out without realizing it, her fingers moving on their own. The careful handwriting, the plain, formal words. A woman of steady character. A practical arrangement. "Did he leave any message?" she asked. "For me, specifically?" "Not that I know of." She folded the letter and put it back in her pocket. "Thank you," she said, because she had been raised to be polite even when the world was not. The station master walked away. And then there was no one. Just Clara Whitmore standing on an empty platform in a town she had never seen before, in the middle of a territory she didn't know, with $14 and nowhere to go. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the street. Red Hollow's main road was exactly 1 block long if you were generous about where it started and ended. There was a general store, a barber shop with a cracked mirror in the window, a small building that appeared to serve as both a post office and a dentist's office, which Clara found troubling, and a saloon called the Copper Nail that smelled of sawdust and something sharper. A boarding house sat at the far end with a sign reading "Rooms, 50 cents a night" in faded paint. She walked toward it. She was aware of being watched, not subtly. The people of Red Hollow did not appear to specialize in subtlety. 2 women standing outside the general store stopped their conversation entirely. A man on a porch tilted his chair forward. A boy, maybe 12 years old, stared at her open-mouthed until an older woman grabbed his shoulder and turned him around. Clara kept her spine straight. She had learned a long time ago that the only answer to being watched was to give them nothing to read. The boarding house door was answered by a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and an expression like a locked gate. Her name, as indicated by the small sign beside the door, was Mrs. Ruth Gable, proprietress. "I'm looking for a room," Clara said. "Short term until I can make other arrangements." Mrs. Gable looked her over. "You came in on the train?" "Yes, ma'am." "Pratt's bride?" The way she said it wasn't cruel exactly, but it landed like a stone on a flat water, making a small, unavoidable splash. "Clara Whitmore," Clara said, offering her hand. The woman didn't take it. "I run a respectable establishment, Miss Whitmore. My other tenants are families and working men. I don't take in—" She searched for the word she wanted. "Women in uncertain situations." "I need a room for 2 nights," Clara said. I'll pay in advance. I'm quiet, I'm clean, and my situation is only as uncertain as any widows or spinsters in this country, which by my count is the majority of women between 30 and 70. Something flickered in Mrs. Gable's face. 50 cents a night." "I know. I read the sign." There was a pause. Then Mrs. Gable said, "Full house tonight. Nothing available." Clara looked at her steadily. "The full house sign isn't on the door." "Just filled up." Mrs. Gable closed the door. Clara stood on the porch for a moment. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, a habit she had developed years ago when the grief had been so large it threatened to fill her chest entirely and leave no room for air. She breathed until the worst of it passed. Then she picked up her suitcase and went back down the steps. She tried the next option she could think of, which was the saloon. Not to drink, she had no interest in drinking, but because saloons in her experience were the one place in a frontier town that would talk to anyone, provided you could pay for something. She pushed open the Copper Nail's door and stepped inside. The saloon went quiet the way rooms do when something unexpected walks in. Not violent quiet, just the brief, rude cessation of sound that says you don't belong here. The bartender was a heavy-set man with a mustache that had seen better days. He looked at her without smiling. "Help you?" "I'm looking for a room, or someone who might know of work. I can cook, sew, manage accounts, and I have some nursing experience." She kept her voice even. "I'll take most anything reasonable." "This is a saloon, not an employment office." "I'm aware. I'm asking if you happen to know anyone who might be hiring." A voice from one of the tables said, loud enough for the room, "Heard Pratt's bride got left standing at the station." Laughter. Not the good-natured kind. Clara turned toward the voice. A man in his 40s, heavy-set, hat pushed back on his head, grinning at her with the particular pleasure of someone who finds other people's misfortune entertaining. "That's me," Claire said pleasantly, although technically I was never his bride since no vows were spoken. I'm just a woman who got on a train, which I understand happens frequently. The grinning stopped. Someone else in the room made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. You're a long way from home, the bartender said, his tone somewhere between dismissive and not unkind. I don't have a home at the moment, Clara said, which is the problem I'm trying to solve. If nobody here can point me toward a room or work, I'll be on my way. She looked around the room once. Thank you for your time. She pushed through the door back into the sunlight. Outside, she stopped. She needed to think. She had $14 and no connections in this town, and the afternoon was already tilting toward evening. She could try to get the next eastbound train and go back, but back to what exactly? The rooming house in Cincinnati had already rented her room. She had no family living. She had thought, carefully and practically, about this step for months, and she had taken it because there was nothing behind her and something, however uncertain, ahead. She sat down on the edge of the station platform, set her suitcase beside her, and looked at the street. A group of women passing on the far side glanced at her, then leaned together and murmured. One of them, young, pretty, wearing a blue dress with buttons down the front, looked across at Clara with an expression that wasn't quite contempt. It was something slightly worse, the careful, deliberate refusal to see her, as if looking away hard enough could make Clara Whitmore's existence someone else's problem. Clara had been looked at that way before. In the years after her husband Thomas died, fever, 4 years ago now, she had been looked at that way regularly. The widow who couldn't make her farm work alone. The woman who had to sell off her things piece by piece. The woman who was, by the unspoken accounting of her community, a reminder of how fast your life could go sideways if you weren't careful. People look away from things that frighten them. She was not frightened of herself. That was perhaps the one advantage of having already lost so much. There wasn't much left to be afraid of. She sat there on the platform as the afternoon moved through its paces. A dog came and sniffed her suitcase and lost interest. The station master came out once, looked at her, went back inside. Clouds moved across the sun and the temperature dropped 5 degrees, and then the sun came back. Clara was still sitting there when she heard small footsteps. She looked up. A child was walking toward her along the platform. A girl, maybe 5 or 6, with dark hair that had been braided and then abandoned somewhere around midday, coming undone in pieces around her face. She wore a dress that was practical rather than pretty, brown calico with a hem that had been let down and was still uneven. Her boots were good quality, Clara noticed. Well made, but dusty. A child from a working household rather than a destitute one. The girl stopped about 3 feet away and looked at Clara with the frank, total assessment that only small children and very old people manage. Clara looked back. "Hello," she said. The child didn't say hello. She kept staring. Her eyes were light brown, almost amber, and they had the unnerving quality of seeming to read something that wasn't visible on the surface. "Are you lost?" Clara asked. The girl shook her head. "Did someone send you over here?" Another shake. Clara nodded slowly. "All right. Are you just looking?" The girl took one step forward, then another. She came close enough that Clara could see a small scar on her chin, barely visible, the kind that comes from a childhood fall. She tilted her head. She looked at Clara's face the way you look at something you are trying to place, the way you look at a word you know but can't quite recall. And then the girl's face changed. It wasn't gradual. It happened all at once, like a lamp being lit. Her eyes went wide and her mouth opened, and something flooded into her expression that Clara had no word for. Not recognition exactly. Something deeper and stranger. Something that made Clara's chest pull tight for reasons she couldn't explain. The girl turned her head toward the people on the nearby street. There were maybe a dozen by now, going about their evening, some of them still watching Clara the way they'd been watching her all afternoon. And she said, in a voice that was small but carried, "That's her." Several people looked up. "That's her," the child said again, louder now, turning back to Clara. "That's my mama." The street didn't go quiet all at once. It happened in waves, nearest first, and then spreading, the conversation stopping one after another like candles being snuffed. Within 10 seconds, there was not a sound except the distant creak of a weather vane and the soft movement of the wind. Clara stared at the girl. The girl stared at Clara. "Sweetheart," Clara said carefully, "I think you might be mixed up. I don't That's my mama. The girl said it for the third time, without doubt, without hesitation, with the flat certainty of a person stating a fact they have simply always known. And then she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around Clara's waist and pressed her face against Clara's coat and held on. Clara sat frozen. Her hands hovered above the girl's shoulders, not quite touching. Around them, the silence of Red Hollow stretched and tightened. Somewhere in the watching crowd, a woman made a sound, half gasp, half something else. Clara looked up at the faces around her. Some were stunned, some were confused. Some, the ones who had been watching her all afternoon with barely concealed contempt, wore expressions she couldn't read at all. Nobody moved. Clara looked down at the top of the girl's head, the unraveling braid, the fine dark hair, the small body that was holding on to her as if releasing its grip was not something it was prepared to consider. Slowly, carefully, Clara lowered her hands. She set them on the girl's shoulders. She felt the warmth of the child through her dress, the small solidity of her, and something in Clara's chest shifted. Some long-braced thing that had been holding itself in place through sheer stubbornness finally, just slightly, let go. "What's your name?" she asked, very quietly. The girl pulled back just enough to look up at her. "Lily," she said. "Lily Carter." "Lily," Clara repeated. "I dreamed about you," Lily said with complete seriousness. "I dreamed a woman came on a train. I knew it was you when I saw you." She paused. "You were sitting by yourself and nobody came." Clara's throat closed around whatever she'd been about to say. "I'm here now," Lily said, "so you don't have to sit by yourself anymore." From somewhere in the crowd, a man said, "Lord, that's Ethan Carter's girl." And the crowd began to stir again, the silence breaking into murmurs. The murmurs into the particular excited, scandalized buzz of a community that has just been handed a story to tell over dinner. But Clara barely heard any of it. She was looking at Lily Carter, who was looking back at her, and both of them were still, in the middle of all that noise, in a quiet that had nothing to do with the absence of sound. Clara did not know what to do. This was an unusual feeling for her. She was by nature and by long necessity a practical woman. She had buried a husband, managed her own grief on a schedule that didn't leave room for collapse, sold a farm, navigated the Byzantine social rules of widowhood in a mid-sized Ohio city, and gotten herself across several states alone. She was not a woman who frequently did not know what to do, but a 6-year-old stranger insisting she was her mother was a situation that fell outside her previous experience. "Lily," she said carefully, "has anyone ever told you about me before? A family member, maybe, or someone in town?" Lily considered this with genuine seriousness, her forehead creasing. "No," she said, "I just dreamed it." Dreams can feel very real sometimes. This wasn't like that kind of real, Lily said. It was more real than that. Clara wasn't sure how to argue with the distinction, so she didn't try. "Where is your father, sweetheart?" "He's coming." Lily said it matter-of-factly, as if his arrival were simply a scheduled event. "He saw me run off. He'll be here soon." "He'll be worried." "He's always worried." Lily said this not with resentment, but with the affectionate resignation of someone who has long since accepted a particular quality in a person they love. That's just how he is. Around them, the crowd had thickened slightly, word moving fast through small towns the way it always does. And the quality of the watching had shifted from idle curiosity to something more pointed. Clara could feel it the way you feel a weather change, some atmospheric pressure altering before the actual storm arrives. "She's making it up," someone said, not quite quietly enough. A woman's voice. "Children do that?" "Ethan won't like it." Another voice, male, lower, "doesn't like strangers near the girl." Clara kept her expression calm. She was aware that whatever happened next would be decided in public, in front of an audience that had already made certain assumptions about her, and that this made everything more complicated and more dangerous. She heard the footsteps before she saw him. They were heavy, deliberate footsteps, not rushed but purposeful, the stride of a man who had covered a lot of ground on foot and knew how to do it efficiently. She looked up. He was tall. Taller than she'd expected somehow, though she couldn't have said what she'd expected. Dark hair pushed back from his face under a wide-brimmed hat, a jaw that suggested he did most of his communicating with his silence. He wore the kind of clothes that were built for function: heavy canvas pants, a work shirt, boots that had been resoled more than once. His hands were visible even at this distance, the hands of someone who used them constantly. He was probably 40, maybe a few years past it. He looked like a man who had been through something and come out the other side not quite intact, but still standing. He was looking at Lily. Lily. His voice was controlled. Come here. Lily did not move from beside Clara. Papa, this is her. This is the woman from my dream. Something moved through Ethan Carter's face. It was quickly suppressed, but Clara caught it. Pain, maybe. Or something that lived next to pain. Come here, Lily. I don't want to. Lily. Firmer now. Lily looked up at Clara. In a low voice, entirely serious, she said, He doesn't understand yet. He will. Then she walked to her father and took his hand. Ethan Carter looked at Clara over his daughter's head. The look was not warm. It was the look of a man who has learned to assess strangers quickly and assume the worst pending evidence to the contrary. He was looking at her the way you look at a problem that has appeared in your field, something you didn't plant, don't recognize, and now have to decide what to do with. You're Pratt's woman, he said. Not a question. I'm Clara Whitmore, she said. I was supposed to marry William Pratt, but he left town before I arrived. I am not any man's woman. Ethan's eyes held hers for a moment. Then he looked at Lily, then back at Clara. Something in his expression shifted. Not warmth, not yet, barely anything, but an adjustment. You have people here? No. Money? She hesitated, then decided the truth was simpler. $14. He nodded slowly. His jaw moved slightly, the way jaws do when a person is having an internal argument they haven't decided the outcome of yet. Where are you staying? Nowhere yet. The boarding house declined. From the crowd, someone snorted. It might have been a laugh. It might have been agreement. Ethan looked at the people around them with an expression that made them abruptly find other things to look at. He was not, Clara realized, a man people were eager to cross. Not because he seemed violent, there was nothing threatening in his posture exactly, but because he had the quality of someone who meant what he said and followed through on it, which was often more frightening than a raised voice. You can ride back to the ranch with me and Lily, he said finally. Sleep in the hired hand's quarters tonight. It's not much, but it's a roof. Clara looked at him. Why? The question seemed to surprise him slightly. Most people, she imagined, didn't ask him why when he offered something. Because my daughter has decided you're important, he said, and I've learned it's harder than it sounds to tell Lily she's wrong. Lily, from beside him, said, That's true. Clara looked at the child, then at the man who had not yet decided whether to trust her, then at the town that had already decided not to. She picked up her suitcase. All right, she said. Thank you. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something more careful than gratitude. An acceptance offered by a woman who had learned the difference between a gift and a transaction and was still working out which this was. The crowd parted for them as they walked. Clara Whitmore did not look back at the platform where she had spent her afternoon. She did not look back at the empty tracks or the boarding house with its closed door or the faces of people who had decided she wasn't worth looking at. She walked beside Lily Carter, who had taken her free hand without asking, and behind Ethan Carter, who had not said another word, and she kept her spine straight and her eyes forward, and she breathed, in and then out, as the town of Red Hollow fell behind her. The wagon ride to the Carter Ranch took 40 minutes, and almost none of it was spent in conversation. Ethan drove from the front bench, his shoulders set in that particular way of men who are used to being alone in their own heads and prefer it that way. Lily sat between them. She had installed herself there without asking, as if the arrangement were already decided, and spent most of the ride pointing out things along the road in the manner of a tour guide who assumes her audience is deeply interested. That rock shaped like a sleeping dog. The cottonwood that got split by lightning 2 summers ago. The place where she once found a turtle and tried to bring it home, and her father said absolutely not, and she cried for an hour, and he still said no. I wasn't actually sad about the turtle, Lily told Clara confidentially. I just wanted to see if it would work." "Did it work?" Clara asked. "No." Lily paused. "But I got closer than I expected." Ethan said nothing to this, but something shifted almost imperceptibly in the line of his back, and Clara had the impression that he had heard this story before and found it slightly less unfunny than he let on. The land opened up as they moved away from town. Wyoming had a way of doing that, making you feel the smallness of human settlements, how little space they actually occupied against the scale of everything else. The scrub grass ran out in long, flat stretches and then gathered itself into low hills, and beyond the hills the mountains sat blue and distant and entirely indifferent to what happened below them. Clara had grown up in Ohio, where the land was softer, greener, more willing to accommodate. This was different. This land didn't negotiate. It simply was, and you either learned to exist within it or you didn't. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that she didn't hate it. The ranch appeared around a long bend, a main house, 2 outbuildings, a barn that was large and well-maintained, a fence line that stretched further than she could see. It wasn't a wealthy man's property, but it wasn't a struggling one either. Someone had worked this land seriously and for a long time. The main house was wood frame, 2 stories, the paint not fresh, but not peeling. A covered porch ran along the front. 2 horses in the near pasture lifted their heads as the wagon came in. Lily jumped down before the wagon fully stopped. "I'll show you where you sleep," she told Clara. "Lily," Ethan's voice. "Let her get down first." Clara climbed down from the wagon on her own, managing her suitcase, and stood looking at the property for a moment. Then she looked at Ethan, who was unhitching the horses with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done the same task 10,000 times. "Thank you again," she said. "I'll be out of your way by morning." He glanced at her over the horse's back. "Where will you go?" It was a direct question, not unkind, just direct. Clara appreciated direct. "I'll figure something out. There may be eastbound connections I can manage with what I have." He looked at her for a moment longer, then back at the horse. "Supper's at 6, he said. "Lily will show you where to wash up." It wasn't an invitation exactly. It was more like a statement of household fact, offered without ceremony, which Clara thought was probably the closest he came to warmth with someone he didn't know yet. She followed Lily to the small room behind the barn. The hired hand's quarters were a single room with a wood-framed cot, a small washstand, and a window that looked out over the back pasture. The mattress was thin, but the blankets were clean. Someone had left a pitcher of water on the washstand, and Clara suspected it was Lily, based on the small, wet handprints on the pitcher's side. She set her suitcase down and sat on the edge of the cot and let herself be tired for exactly 5 minutes. She had learned to do this, to give herself a limited, deliberate window for the feelings she didn't have time to carry around all day. 5 minutes. Then she stood up, poured water into the basin, washed her face and hands, unpacked what she needed from her suitcase, and went to find the kitchen. It was not difficult to find. She followed the smell of something burning. The kitchen was large by frontier standards, a real stove, a long work table, actual shelves with actual organization, though the organization had lapsed somewhat. The source of the burning smell was a pot on the stove containing what had once been beans and was now progressing towards something more geological. Lily was standing on a step stool beside the stove, stirring with an expression of extreme concentration and complete inadequacy. "When did you start these?" Clara asked. "Before we left," Lily said. "I thought they'd be ready when we got back." "How long ago did you start them?" Lily thought about it. "A while." Clara came to the stove and looked in the pot. The beans on the bottom had fused into a dark crust that would require a chisel and some optimism to remove. The beans on top were salvageable, barely. She moved the pot off the heat, found a clean pot, transferred what was usable, added water from the bucket by the sink, and assessed what else might be in the kitchen. There was cornmeal, dried beef, onions, soft but not rotten, 3 eggs. She started moving. Lily watched her from the step stool with that same quality of total, undisguised attention. "You cook fast," she said. "I cook when I'm thinking," Clara said. "It helps." "What are you thinking about?" "Where to go tomorrow." Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "You don't have to go tomorrow." It's not really my house to stay in, Lily. Papa said supper at 6. Lily said it as if this settled something. Supper isn't the same as staying. I know. Another pause, the child's particular mode of silence that meant she was not done. But I asked him. Clara stopped what she was doing. You asked him what? If you could stay longer. Lily met her eyes, direct and steady. He said he'd think about it. When Papa says he'll think about it, it usually means yes. It just takes him time to admit it. Clara looked at this child, 6 years old, missing her mother, dragging strangers off train platforms on the strength of a dream, and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not pity, something closer to recognition. You should have asked me first, Clara said finally. Lily considered this. You would have said no. Papa might say yes. That's why I asked him first. Clara turned back to the stove. After a moment, she said, That's fairly strategic for a 6-year-old. I'm almost 7, Lily said. Papa says I think older than I am. Your father would be right. Ethan came in from the barn as the food was finishing. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the stove, at Clara moving around it, at the smell that was now something better than burned beans. His expression did what expressions do when they're genuinely surprised, but the person wearing them doesn't think surprise is something to be shown. You didn't need to do that, he said. The alternative was beans that had turned to rock, Clara said. I made cornbread and got the beef and onions going. I found the eggs, but I'll leave those. Eggs at breakfast make more sense. Ethan came further into the kitchen and poured himself water from the pitcher on the table. He stood by the window and drank it. Clara noticed he positioned himself where he could see both her and the door. Not suspiciously, just the habit of a man who liked to know where things were. Lily says you're from Ohio, he said. Cincinnati, most recently. Before that, a farm outside Dayton. Husband? Died 4 years ago. He nodded. He didn't say he was sorry, which Clara appreciated. People said it reflexively because they didn't know what else to say, but it didn't mean anything after 4 years. It was just a sound. What did you do after? He asked. I tried to keep the farm, she said. Couldn't, alone, sold it, worked in Cincinnati, laundry, then seamstress work. Then I learned accounts from a man who ran a dry goods store and needed help with his books. I was good at it. She paused. The Matrimonial Gazette seemed like a practical option for a woman with no particular prospects in one location. And Pratt, she agreed flatly, who apparently had a different definition of practical. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He's not a good man, he said. I could have told you that if I'd known. Most people know who's not a good man after the fact, Clara said. That's the frustrating thing about it. Something that might have been a brief, reluctant flicker of agreement crossed his face. He set down the water glass. Lily says she asked me if you could stay on. She told me. Clara kept her eyes on the pan. You don't have to feel obligated. I don't expect anything. I know you don't, he said. That's not why I'm considering it. He paused. I've been needing help with the house, and with Lily since her mother passed. I've gone through 2 women from town, and both of them quit inside a month. The work is hard, and the location is lonely, and I don't... He stopped, started again. I'm not easy to work for. Clara glanced at him. I wouldn't expect you to be. I'm serious. I keep to myself. I don't want the house turned into something it isn't, and I don't want... He searched for the word. Interference. I want the work done, and Lily looked after, and I want to be left to run the ranch my way. That sounds straightforward, Clara said. It's driven off 2 capable women. Then they wanted something different than what you were offering. She turned to face him directly. What I want is a roof and fair wages, and to be treated like a person who knows how to do her job. That's the whole of it. I'm not looking to remake your household into something it isn't. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Not the assessing look he'd given her at the station. Something slightly different, less suspicious, not yet trusting. 3 months, he said. Trial. Wages are $8 a month, room and meals included. If it doesn't work, I'll give you enough to get to the next town with real options. Clara turned back to the stove. 3 months, she said. All right. They ate supper in the kitchen, the three of them, which felt strange and ordinary at the same time in the way that new arrangements always do. Lily talked through most of it, filling the silences with the running commentary of a child who has been the only small person in a house of silence and has learned to generate enough noise to make up for it. Ethan ate steadily and said little. Clara listened and answered Lily's questions and ate more than she'd expected to, which was how she knew she'd been hungrier than she'd let herself acknowledge. After supper, Lily was sent to bed. Clara washed the dishes. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway again, hat in hand, on his way out to do the final check of the evening. He stopped. Clara. She looked up. The people in town, he said. They're not. They gossip. It's a small place. He seemed to be choosing words with some effort. I wanted you to know that what happens here is my business, and I don't care what they say. Clara dried her hands on the dishcloth. I've been talked about before, she said. I'm still standing. He nodded once and left. Clara stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to his footsteps cross the porch and fade. Then she looked around the room. The shelves, the stove, the table with the 3 plates now cleared, the window with the dark Wyoming night pressing against it. She was still here. That was something. The weeks that followed did not arrange themselves into anything neat or easy. Clara had not expected them to, and they did not disappoint her. The house was not dirty exactly, but it was neglected in the specific way houses get when the person maintaining them has been too tired or too lost to notice the slow accumulation of things that need doing. There were split seams in the curtains that had been left split. The hinges on 2 of the kitchen cabinet doors were loose, and the doors hung crooked. A section of the porch railing had cracked and been propped rather than fixed. The pantry organization made sense to no one, including Clara suspected Ethan, who had continued it from some previous system without understanding the logic behind it. She started slowly. Not because she lacked energy, but because she understood that moving too fast in someone else's space created the impression of judgment, and she was not there to judge. She mended the curtains on a Saturday afternoon while Lily sat beside her learning to thread a needle, which Lily found mostly frustrating and a little bit satisfying. She tightened the cabinet hinges herself, using a screwdriver from the tool shelf in the barn after asking Ethan's permission, which he gave with an expression suggesting he hadn't thought of doing it himself and wasn't sure whether to be grateful or vaguely embarrassed about that. The porch railing she mentioned to him directly. The railing on the left side, she said. It's cracked through. If Lily leans on it wrong, it'll give. He'd gone out and looked at it that same evening and repaired it the next morning before breakfast. He didn't say anything about it afterward, and neither did she. But something in the atmosphere of the house shifted slightly. The small, barely perceptible shift that happens when 2 people begin to establish a working rhythm. Lily was not a difficult child to care for. She was demanding in the way all children are, requiring attention and patience, and the willingness to answer questions that had no easy answers. Why did her mother die? Why didn't she get to say goodbye? Why did some of the children in town say things about her father that made her feel bad in a way she couldn't explain? Clara answered what she could answer honestly and said, I don't know where she didn't, which Lily seemed to find acceptable. Most adults, Clara had found, said I don't know far less often than they should. Reading had been the thing that caught. Lily knew her letters but had been taught them without context, the way you memorize a list rather than understand its use. Clara started with simple words, then sentences, then a short passage from an almanac she found on the shelf, the only printed matter in the house besides a few official-looking papers in a box Ethan kept in his office. Within 2 weeks, Lily was reading the almanac entries on her own, sounding out the longer words with her forehead creased in that particular expression of effort and determination. Ethan found them at it one evening, Lily reading aloud at the kitchen table while Clara mended a shirt. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, before either of them noticed him. Clara couldn't read what was on his face exactly, but she noticed he stayed in the doorway longer than he needed to before he said anything. Supper soon? He asked. 20 minutes, Clara said. He went back out. He did not comment on the reading lesson. But the next afternoon, a second book appeared on the kitchen table. an old, worn copy of Natural History with illustrations of animals and plants that Lily fell on with the avidity of someone who has been hungry without knowing what they were hungry for. Clara left it where Ethan had put it and didn't mention it, because some things land better when they're not examined directly. The town was a different matter. She went in twice a week for supplies, driving the small wagon on Tuesdays and Fridays. The first few trips were exercises in deliberate invisibility. She completed her business at the general store, spoke when spoken to, and returned without incident. But small towns have their own gravitational laws, and a woman living alone at the Carter Ranch was too interesting a piece of information to leave alone. The rumors started, as rumors in small places always do, as something shapeless and without an obvious source. Clara heard them secondhand through Lily, who reported them with the guileless accuracy of a child who doesn't yet understand why information is sometimes kept from people. "Mrs. Holloway said you're trying to take my mama's place," Lily said one afternoon. Claire kept her hands on what she was doing. She was sorting dried goods on the pantry shelf. "What did you say?" "I said nobody could take Mama's place because places don't work like that." Lily paused. "Was that right?" "That was exactly right," Claire said. She didn't look satisfied. People who enjoy being dissatisfied rarely are. Lily thought about this. "She said you're only here because you have nowhere else to go and Papa took pity on you." Claire moved a jar of dried corn to the left shelf where it belonged. "Is that what she said?" "Is it true?" Clara turned to look at Lily, who was watching her with that level, earnest gaze. "Your father didn't take pity on me," she said. "He offered me a job with conditions, and I accepted them. I'm here because I'm working, same as anyone." "That's what I told her," Lily said. "She said that's what I'd been told to say." "What did you say to that?" "I said nobody tells me what to say." Lily's chin came up slightly. "That's also true." "Also true," Clara agreed. But the rumors didn't stay with Lily. They spread the way things in small towns spread, not fast, but thorough. Clara felt them when she went into town. The conversations that paused a beat too long when she entered a space, the careful positioning of women who wanted to watch without being caught watching, the particular social temperature of a community that had decided to have an opinion about you and was waiting to see if you'd give them more material. What she did not expect was Ethan. He came in from the fields one Tuesday to find her preparing to take the wagon into town, and fell into step beside her without comment. She looked at him. "You don't need to come," she said. "I know," he said. He drove. He didn't explain. They went through the general store together. He handled the supplies he needed, she handled hers, and when Mrs. Holloway appeared near the counter and began a sentence that started with, "Mr. Carter, I was only saying," he looked at her in a way that stopped the sentence before it finished itself, and the woman found something else to attend to. On the way back, Clara said, "You didn't have to do that." He kept his eyes on the road. "I know. It'll make the talk worse, you know. People say whatever they want to," Ethan said, "regardless." He paused. "I'm aware of how it looks. I don't especially care." Clara looked at the road ahead of them, the scrub grass, the mountains in the distance. "You should," she said, not unkindly, "for Lily's sake, if not your own." "I've thought about that." Another pause. The wagon wheel hit a rut, and he adjusted the reins without breaking stride. "But I've also watched you work in my house for 4 weeks, and I know enough now to know that the things they're saying don't match the person I've been watching, and that matters more to me than what they've decided." Clara was quiet for a moment. 4 weeks isn't very long to know someone." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." They drove in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable silence, a different kind, the kind that two people settle into when they've said something true and don't feel the need to immediately say something over the top of it. "Your wife," Clara said eventually. She left the sentence open, not quite a question, giving him the choice of whether to enter it. He took a moment. "Margaret," he said. 2 years ago last spring. It was fast. 3 weeks from when she took sick to when she was gone. Lily was 4. She remembers her mother, but the memories are starting to thin out." His jaw moved. "She doesn't say so, but I can tell." "Children that age," Clara said carefully, They hold on to the feeling more than the specific memories. That doesn't go away. Ethan didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had changed slightly. Not softer exactly, but less defended. She talks about you, he said. Lily. In a way she hasn't talked about anyone since Margaret. He didn't look at her. I noticed. Clara watched the road. She's a remarkable child. She is, he said, and there was a simplicity in those two words that said more than an elaborate speech would have. They came over the last rise before the ranch, and the buildings appeared below them in the afternoon light, and Lily was visible on the porch, even from this distance, a small figure that had clearly been watching for the wagon. She stood up and waved with her whole arm. Ethan lifted one hand. Clara watched it, the small private exchange between a man and his daughter, the way distance collapsed for a second in that lifted hand, and she felt something settle further inside her. Not happiness, not certainty, something quieter and more durable, the sense of a place that was beginning, cautiously, to make room for her. She had learned not to trust that feeling too quickly. She had been wrong before about places and people and what they were offering, but she noted it, the way you note a change in the weather. Not counting on it, just aware that something had shifted. The wagon rolled down toward the ranch, and Lily came off the porch running, and Ethan set the brake and climbed down to meet her. And Clara gathered the supplies from the back with her usual efficiency, and the ordinary evening of an ordinary day assembled itself around them, imperfect and unfinished, and very much like something real. What Clara did not yet know, what she had no way of knowing on that ordinary evening, was that the most ordinary-seeming things were precisely the ones about to be interrupted. The 3 weeks of cautious, workaday peace she had built inside Ethan Carter's house were resting on ground that someone else was about to disturb, and she would not hear his name until he was already riding into Red Hollow with that particular smile of a man who believed his arrival solved problems rather than created them. But that was still ahead. That evening, there was supper and Lily's reading lesson, and the sound of Ethan moving through the house with the heavy, tired step of a man who had worked hard and would sleep well. There was the window in Clara's small room, now hung with a curtain she had made from spare fabric she'd found in the back of the linen closet. There was the back pasture in the dark, and the horses she could hear shifting in the barn, and the particular silence of Wyoming at night, which was not the absence of sound, but a kind of sound in itself. Clara sat on the edge of her cot and unlaced her boots and set them beside the door. And she thought, not for long, just briefly, the kind of thought that comes before sleep takes over. That this was the first time in 4 years she had gone to bed without the specific heavy dread of not knowing what the next day would require of her. She didn't name it. Naming things too soon was how you jinx them. She lay down, pulled the blanket up, and closed her eyes. And for once, sleep came without a fight. He rode into Red Hollow on a Thursday, which was market day, which meant half the town was already gathered in the street when he arrived, and the other half heard about it within the hour. Claire was at the general store when it happened. She had the supply list in her hand and was working through it with the methodical efficiency she'd developed over 6 weeks of managing the Carter household: flour, salt, lamp oil, thread in brown and black, the particular kind of hard candy that Lily preferred and that Clara bought 1 piece at a time as a Friday reward for completing her reading lessons without complaint. She was at the counter counting coins when the sound of the horse reached her through the open door, followed by the particular quality of silence that means people outside have stopped what they were doing to look at something. She didn't think anything of it. Strangers passed through Red Hollow regularly enough. It was the storekeeper's expression that made her look up. Frank Delaney was a mild man in his 60s who had sold dry goods in Red Hollow for 20 years and prided himself on minding his own business. He was looking past Clara toward the door with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Not alarm exactly, something more specific. The look of a man who recognizes incoming weather. "Miss Whitmore," he said carefully. "You might want to finish up." Clara turned. The man on the horse was visible through the store's front window, stopped in the middle of the road as if he'd calculated precisely where the most people could see him. He was perhaps 45, broad-shouldered, wearing a coat that was better quality than anything Red Hollow generally produced. His hat was dark, his horse was well-fed, and he sat in the saddle with the particular ease of a man who expected to be noticed and was rarely disappointed. Even from the window at this distance, she knew him. Not from memory, from the shape of him. From something that moved through her chest like a cold current. Not fear, not quite, but the close cousin of it. The knowledge, immediate and instinctive, that whatever was about to happen had already been set in motion before she'd looked up from her coins. She took her change from Frank Delaney. She picked up her basket. She walked out the door. Victor Hale had not changed in the months since he'd written her those 3 letters. She had never met him in person. The correspondence had been conducted through the Matrimonial Gazette's intermediary service, which meant she'd seen only words on paper, no photograph, nothing that would have told her what kind of face produced that careful, reasonable handwriting. She saw it now. It was a face that had learned to look trustworthy, the way some faces do when the person behind them is needed to appear trustworthy often enough that the performance has settled into habit. He was talking to a man in the street when Clara came out, laughing at something, a large sociable laugh, the laugh of a man making himself known. When he turned and saw her, the laugh didn't die exactly. It rearranged itself into something else, a smile, warm, slightly rueful, staged for an audience he was already gathering. "Clara," he said, as if they were old friends interrupted mid-visit. "I've been looking for you." The people nearest them had already stopped pretending they weren't listening. Clara was aware of it. The turned faces, the paused conversations, the slight gathering in that small crowds do when they sense something is about to be worth watching. "Mr. Hale," she said. She kept her voice level. "I wasn't aware I was lost." He came toward her with the confident stride of a man accustomed to closing distances on his terms. Up close, he was better looking than she'd imagined and more calculating than the letters had suggested. His eyes moved over her quickly, assessing, and she recognized the assessment. She'd been assessed like that at train platforms and church socials, and across counters for most of her adult life. The particular male arithmetic that added up your age and your looks and your circumstances, and arrived at a number that told them how much work they'd have to do. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me more than that," she said pleasantly, "but an explanation would be a start." Something flickered in his expression. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected confusion, maybe. Hurt. Something softer. He recovered quickly. "I had a change in circumstances," he said. "I meant to write, but things moved faster than I anticipated, and by the time You found a younger woman," Claire said. "That's what I was told." The crowd around them had grown. She could feel it without looking at it. Victor Hale felt it too, she could tell. He had the quality of a man who performed better with an audience and knew it. "I made a poor decision," he said, "and it didn't work out. I came back to Red Hollow to make things right." "To make things right," Claire repeated. "You came out here under my promise," he said. "I understand you've been in a difficult situation. I want to correct that." He paused, and the pause was precise, the pause of someone who has rehearsed this. "I'm prepared to honor the original arrangement, if you'll still have me." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a crowd that has stopped breathing. Clara stood with her basket on her arm and looked at Victor Hale. She looked at him for long enough that he began to shift slightly under the weight of it, his smile holding but the edges going uncertain. "No," she said. The word landed cleanly without decoration. His smile adjusted. "Clara." "Miss Whitmore," she said. "And I heard you, Mr. Hale. I'm saying no." "You don't have to decide right now," he said, and his voice had shifted into something more careful, more deliberate, the tone of a man downshifting gears when the first approach hasn't worked. "Think about your situation. You're living on a man's charity." "I'm living on wages I earn," she said. "There's a difference. You're a single woman, alone out here, no family, no real prospects." "I have prospects," she said. "I have work and a place, and I'm not interested in trading any of it for an arrangement with a man who left me standing at a train station because he'd found a better offer." She kept her voice even. Not cold, calm, the way you're calm when something has already been decided and you're just waiting for the other person to catch up. "I appreciate that you came back. I imagine it wasn't easy to admit you'd made a mistake, but the mistake you made wasn't failing to marry me. It was thinking I'd still be available when you changed your mind." Victor Hale's face had gone through several phases during this speech. The audience around them was very still. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said quietly, and the pleasant performance had thinned enough that something else showed through. Not anger, not yet, but its precursor. The affronted surprise of a man who had mapped out a conversation and found the other person had not followed the map. "I'm making it honest," Clara said, "which is more than the letters were." She nodded at him briefly, in the manner of someone concluding a business transaction, and turned to go. "You'll regret this," he said. Not a threat exactly, a prediction offered by a man who believed his own value was self-evident. Clara didn't turn around. "Possibly," she said, "but not for the reason you think." She walked back to the wagon, loaded her basket, and drove back to the ranch. Her hands on the reins were steady. She noted that they were steady with something like satisfaction, the way you notice a machine is still working after you were afraid it might not. She did not tell Ethan immediately. She told Lily to wash up for supper, started the stove, and went about the ordinary business of the evening. She had gotten almost to the end of supper preparation when she heard the horse in the yard, not the wagon horse, a different one, moving faster than the usual pace of ranch arrivals. Ethan came in through the back door with the particular tension in his face that meant someone had reached him before she had. "Hale is in town," he said. "I know," Clara said. "I spoke to him this afternoon." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. He didn't take his hat off, which told her how preoccupied he was. He always took his hat off in the kitchen. "Tom Reeder rode out to tell me. Said the whole street watched it." He looked at her. "Said you handled yourself." "I said no and walked away," she said. "That's all." Tom said it was more than that. Clara turned the pan on the stove. "Tom Reeder talks more than most women I've known." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then, "Is he going to be a problem?" "I don't think he'll take no easily," she said. "Men like that generally don't. They mistake persistence for charm." She paused. "But he doesn't have any hold on me. The arrangement was never legal, never binding. He has nothing to stand on." "He doesn't need to stand on anything legal to make things difficult," Ethan said. "He can talk. He can push the town's opinion in whatever direction he wants, and they're—" He stopped. "Already half against me," Clara said. "I know." Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at the table, then at her. "If you want to leave," he said carefully, "if this is more trouble than you want to deal with, I'll pay you what you're owed and give you enough to go somewhere decent. I mean that. This isn't your fight." Clara looked at him. He was offering her an exit, which was a decent thing to do. She could also see that the offer cost him something. Not the money, the other thing. The acknowledgement that the ranch would go back to being what it had been before she arrived, quiet and functioning and quietly wrong in all the ways she'd spent 6 weeks fixing. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "No," he said, without hesitation. Then, as if catching himself, "But it's not about what I want." "Lily?" Clara asked. Something moved through his face. He didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Clara turned back to the stove. "I'm not going anywhere because Victor Hale rode into town," she said. "If that changes, I'll tell you directly. That's as much of an answer as I have right now." Ethan nodded. He reached up and took his hat off, set it on the table. "Supper almost ready?" 10 minutes, Clara said. "All right." He stood up. "I'll get Lily." He walked out of the kitchen, and Clara listened to his footsteps on the stairs, and she stood at the stove with the steady, low heat against her hands, and she thought about Victor Hale's face when she'd said no. The way the pleasant surface had thinned, the prediction he'd made as she walked away. She stirred the pot. 1. Victor Hale did not leave Red Hollow. He took a room at the only hotel, which was the upper floor of the Copper Nail, and he established himself with the methodical efficiency of a man executing a plan. He bought drinks for people. He told stories. Good ones, Clara heard, funny ones, the kind that moved through a crowd and left people remembering the teller fondly. He asked about Clara with the careful, concerned air of a man who had made an error and was humbly seeking to repair it, which was a posture that played well in small towns where humility was valued and the details of a stranger's character were still mostly unknown. Within 4 days, he had acquired allies. She felt it in the quality of the looks she received on her Tuesday supply run. Not quite hostile, more interested in the manner of people who have been given a new piece of information and are fitting it into an existing picture. She caught fragments. He says she misunderstood the situation, and he seems genuinely sorry. And once, from two women who didn't notice her close enough to hear, well, you have to wonder why she'd rather work as a hired hand than accept a proper offer. The implication complete in itself and requiring no elaboration. She completed her shopping and drove home and said nothing about it to Ethan. He found out anyway, because Red Hollow was Red Hollow, and Tom Reeder appeared to have made it his personal mission to keep Ethan Carter informed of everything that happened within a 5-mile radius. Ethan brought it up over supper one night, carefully, not accusing anyone of anything, just naming what was happening. He's been talking to the Holloways, Ethan said, and the Breckenridges, people who were already— He glanced at Lily, who was eating with the focused intensity of someone who is pretending not to listen while listening intently. People who'd already formed opinions. I know, Clara said. I could speak to some of them, Ethan said. Set the record straight on what the arrangement here actually is. It wouldn't help, Clara said. When someone's already decided to believe a story, correcting the facts just makes you look defensive. She passed the bread to Lily. The answer to rumors is time, not argument. Eventually people see what's actually true. Ethan looked at her steadily. You have a lot of patience with this. I don't have a choice, she said. Getting angry uses energy I need for other things. Lily looked up from her plate. I got angry, she said. Both adults looked at her. Tommy Reeder said at the well that you were a woman who goes where she's fed, like a stray cat. Lily's expression was remarkably calm for the content of what she was reporting. I told him his father tells more stories than any 3 women I know, and maybe he should think about where he gets his information before he repeats it. Silence at the table. Ethan put his fork down. Lily, you don't talk to other children that way. It was accurate, Lily said. That doesn't— Papa. Lily looked at him with the level, reasonable gaze she had apparently been born with. Someone said something untrue and mean about Clara. Was I supposed to just let it happen? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Clara could see him trying to construct an answer that was both morally sound and practically useful, which was difficult given that Lily's logic was not actually wrong. You could have walked away, he said finally. I could have, Lily agreed, but I didn't want to. She looked at Clara. Was that wrong? Clara looked back at this small, fierce, complicated child. It was kind, she said carefully. Whether it was wise is a separate question. Can something be kind but not wise? Most things worth doing fall somewhere in that category, Clara said. Ethan picked up his fork. After a moment, Clara heard something that might, under different circumstances, have been the beginning of a laugh, suppressed before it fully formed. Victor Hale appeared at the ranch on a Saturday. Clara saw him coming from the kitchen window. The same horse, the same deliberate pace. The coat that announced money without being flashy about it. She stood at the window for a moment, then went to the back door. Ethan was in the barn. She considered going to get him, and then decided not to, because this was her situation to handle, and she was tired of things happening around her rather than by her. She walked out to the yard and stood with her arms at her sides and waited. He swung down from the horse with the ease of a man who was comfortable making an entrance. He looked around the ranch with the appraising look of someone calculating value. Then he looked at her with the revised version of his expression, something more somber than before, more corrected, the face of a man who has done some thinking and arrived at a position of contrition. I wanted to apologize in person, he said, properly, not in the middle of a street with half the town watching. All right, Clara said. She waited. What I did was wrong, he said. I won't pretend otherwise. You acted in good faith and I failed to honor my word, and you suffered for it. He paused. I'm not a bad man, Clara. I made a bad choice. I believe you believe that, she said. His eyes narrowed slightly. I'm trying to make it right. I heard you the first time. She looked at him directly. What I want you to understand, Mr. Hale, is that you making it right and me forgiving you are 2 separate things that don't have to happen in the same conversation. She paused. I don't hate you. I don't have the energy to hate you, but the idea that the correction for what you did is me agreeing to marry you anyway, that doesn't make sense to me. An apology isn't a trade for what I already decided. You're here working for a man who barely knows you, he said, as a hired hand. You could have a real position, a real home. I have a real position, she said. I have real work. I don't know where you got the idea that a woman's home doesn't count if she earned it, but that's not a definition I share. Victor Hale looked at her. Something behind the practiced expression shifted. She saw it, brief but real. Genuine frustration. The kind that comes not from cruelty, but from a man who genuinely cannot understand why what he's offering isn't being accepted, and who is beginning to find that incomprehensible. You're proud, he said, not unkindly, as a diagnosis. I'm particular, she said. There's a difference. What's the difference? Pride refuses things to prove a point, she said. Being particular refuses things because you've thought it through and know what you actually want. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked past her, toward the house, toward something she couldn't see. His expression shifted again, and this time what came through the practiced surface was less flattering, smaller, tighter, the expression of a man whose certainty in his own position is beginning to harden into something else. I'll be in Red Hollow for a while, he said. I have business interests in the territory. We'll likely see each other again. I expect we will, Clara said evenly. He mounted his horse with the same easy movement as before and turned it toward the road. He looked back once. It was not a threatening look, just the look of a man who had expected to win this particular exchange and was working out what it meant that he hadn't. Clara watched him go. She didn't hear Ethan until he spoke, and even then she didn't startle. She had become accustomed enough to his movements that his presence registered without alarm, like a sound you've learned to expect. "You come to try again?" Ethan said from behind her. "He came to apologize," Clara said, "and then to try again." "What did you say?" "No. Again." She heard him move. 2 steps that brought him even with her, standing at her shoulder, watching the road where Hale had disappeared. The silence between them had a different quality than it used to. In the early weeks, it had been the silence of 2 strangers being careful. This was something else, not comfortable exactly, but shared. 2 people looking at the same thing and not needing to explain it to each other. "He said something," Ethan said. It wasn't quite a question. "He said I was proud." She paused. "He might not be entirely wrong about that." "Being proud of the right things isn't a fault," Ethan said. Clara looked at the empty road. "Your daughter said something similar, in different words." "She would." He was quiet for a moment. "She's right more often than I tell her because I'm afraid of what she'll do with the information." Clara made a sound that surprised her. Not quite a laugh, but something in that direction, something that had warmth in it. She caught it before it fully formed, old habit, but not before Ethan heard it. She could tell because something in his posture changed, very slightly, a small releasing, like the difference between a door held closed and a door simply resting shut. "He's not done," she said. "Whatever he came here for, it isn't only me." "No," Ethan agreed. "He's been talking to the land office." She turned to look at him. "That's the business in the territory," Ethan said. "Word came to me this week. He's been asking about property lines, water rights, the creek that runs along the south pasture." His voice was even, but she heard what was underneath it. Not fear, something harder and more complicated. The controlled worry of a man who has built something and is watching a stranger walk its perimeter. That creek is the difference between the ranch being viable and not. Whoever controls it controls the cattle operation. Clara looked at him. "And Hale is asking about it." "He's not just asking," Ethan said. "He made an offer at the land office on a disputed parcel on the east side. The old Greer claim that's been unsettled for years. If he gets it, he gets the upstream access." He paused. "It's legal. It's all completely legal. That's what makes it hard." Clara looked back at the road, now completely empty, just dust settling in the afternoon sun. Victor Hale in his careful letters and his apologetic performance and his eyes that moved over everything with that quiet arithmetic. Not a man who left things to chance, A man who identified what he wanted and approached it from multiple directions simultaneously. He came here today for a reason, she said slowly. Not just to apologize. What do you mean? He wanted to see the ranch, she said. He was looking at it. While he was talking to me, he was looking at everything else. She turned to face Ethan. I think I was the excuse, not the point. Ethan looked at her. The afternoon was going toward evening, the light changing the way it did out here. Fast, dramatic. The shadows lengthening across the yard and the mountains going from blue to purple in the distance. His face in that light was hard, he said, which was the most honest thing she'd heard him say since she arrived. They stood there in the yard in the changing light, with the evening coming on, and Clara felt it then. The thing that had been building for weeks without either of them naming it. Not romance, not yet, not exactly. Something more foundational than that. The sense of two people who have been moving through the same space with mutual wariness and mutual respect, and somewhere in the accumulation of ordinary days had arrived somewhere neither of them had planned to be. She was still thinking about what to say to it, or whether to say anything, when Lily appeared in the doorway of the house and called out that supper was going to burn if nobody came inside. The moment broke in the ordinary way moments do, dissolved back into the ordinary current of the day. They walked inside. Clara went to the stove. Ethan washed his hands at the pump. Lily set the table with the particular intensity she brought to domestic tasks she'd decided were hers. The evening assembled around them, imperfect and alive, and under it, quiet and unaddressed but very much present, the knowledge that Red Hollow was about to become considerably more complicated for all three of them, and that whatever Victor Hale had come to this territory to claim, he had made only the first of what would be several moves. Clara had grown up watching her father play chess. He had taught her one thing above all others. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who attacks loudly. It's the one who makes you feel, move by move, like you're the one choosing, right up until the moment you realize the board has already been decided. She set supper on the table and said nothing of what she was thinking, because some thoughts needed more time before they were useful, and she had learned long ago that the difference between wisdom and worry was mostly a matter of timing. The confrontation at the land office happened on a Monday, which Clara knew because Ethan came home from town that evening with mud on his boots and a quality of controlled anger in his face that she had not seen before. He didn't speak immediately. He came in, washed at the pump, sat at the table, and accepted the coffee she put in front of him without comment. Lily was already in bed. It was past 8, later than Ethan usually returned from town, and the house was quiet in the particular way it got after Lily went to sleep, the silence fuller somehow, more rooms in it. Clara sat across from him and waited. He filed the claim, Ethan said finally, on the Greer parcel. As of this morning, it's registered in his name. Can it be contested? Possibly. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. The Greer claim was disputed for 11 years because the original survey was done wrong. 2 of the boundary markers don't match the creek's actual path. If someone with money and time wanted to argue it, there's ground to stand on. He paused. Hale has money and time. Do you have a lawyer? There's one in Cheyenne. I've used him before. Ethan looked up at her. The problem isn't the legal argument. The argument exists. The problem is that pursuing it takes months, maybe longer. And in the meantime, Hale can put his own cattle on that parcel, redirect the upstream flow, and by the time any court decides in my favor, the damage to the south pasture is already done. He set down the coffee. He knows that. He chose this parcel specifically because the process itself is the weapon. Clara looked at him. In the weeks she had known Ethan Carter, she had seen him tired, reserved, occasionally wry in the oblique way of men who are not comfortable with direct humor. She had not seen him outmaneuvered, and she could see that he knew it. Not just the practical problem of the land, but something more personal in the knowledge that someone had studied his situation and found the precise point of maximum vulnerability. What are people in town saying? She asked. Some of them think it's straightforward business. A man bought a legal claim. That's how the territory works. His jaw tightened. Some of them have been listening to Hale long enough that they think I've been running this ranch on borrowed legitimacy, and it was only a matter of time before someone with more capital came along. And the rest? The rest are waiting to see what I do. He looked at her steadily. That's the honest answer. Clara was quiet for a moment. She was thinking, Not about the legal problem, which was real and required a lawyer, but about the shape of it. The particular way Victor Hale had constructed this situation, how many layers it had. He had come to Red Hollow publicly, positioned himself as a wronged man seeking to make amends, built goodwill in the community over 2 weeks of deliberate socializing, and then filed a legal claim that any objective observer could call simple frontier commerce. The personal and the professional were braided together so tightly that pulling on one pulled the other. He told me he had business interests in the territory, she said, when he came to the ranch. I remember. He said it like it was separate from me, an explanation for why he'd be around. She paused. It wasn't separate. Ethan looked at her. What do you mean? He needed a reason to come to Red Hollow that wasn't about land, she said. The Matrimonial Gazette letter gave him that reason. He could arrive as a man with personal business, romantic business, and use the time to assess the territory without anyone thinking too hard about what he was actually doing. She let that settle. I was the cover story. The silence that followed was not a comfortable one. That might be giving him too much credit, Ethan said, though his voice suggested he didn't entirely believe that. Or not enough, Clara said. Ethan stood up, carried his cup to the sink, stood there with his back to her for a moment. When he turned around, his expression had shifted. The controlled anger still there, but underneath it something that might have been, in a man who wore his feelings more openly, something close to helplessness. He was not a man who tolerated helplessness in himself. She had learned that much. He met it by working harder, planning further ahead, anticipating problems before they arrived. This problem had arrived before he could anticipate it, and that was the part he was still working out how to hold. I'll write to the lawyer in Cheyenne tomorrow, he said. Do that, Clara said, and in the meantime, talk to your neighbors. The Aldersons, the Pemberton family, whoever else runs cattle near that creek. If Hale redirects the water, it doesn't only affect you. He looked at her. That's true. He's counting on you fighting this alone, she said. He's probably good at isolating people, making the problem feel like your personal problem, your specific bad luck. She stood up, began moving the cups to the wash basin. Most things that feel personal are actually structural. If other people are affected, they should be part of the response. Ethan watched her. When did you work out all this? I was married to a man who lost a contract dispute because he thought it was between him and one other man, and it wasn't, she said flatly. I watched him fight alone for 2 years when half his county was in the same situation. I decided then that I would rather see a problem's actual shape than the shape it presents. She dried her hands. I could be wrong. Hale might genuinely only want that parcel and nothing else, but I don't think I am. Ethan nodded slowly. He looked toward the window. The dark yard, the barn, the dark shapes of the horses in the near pasture. Everything he had built and maintained alone since Margaret died. Clara, he said, and stopped. She waited. I want to say something, and I don't want it to come out wrong, he said carefully. Say it directly, she said. I prefer that. He looked at her. I was wrong about you when you arrived, he said. Not about being cautious. I'd have been cautious about anyone. But the specific shape of what I assumed. He paused. I assumed you'd leave when things got hard. I assumed you were here because you had no better option, and you'd move on when one appeared. That was a reasonable assumption, Clara said. Maybe. But it was wrong. He held her gaze. You're still here. You knew Hale before I understood what he was, and you still said no, and you're still here, and you're sitting at my table at 8 at night working out the strategic shape of a legal problem that isn't even yours. He paused again. I wanted to say that I see that. Clara looked at him. He was not a man who said things like this lightly or without cost. She could see what it had taken him to build the sentence, the way his hands were set on the table edge, the slight tension in his jaw. She thought about what to say and decided the only honest answer was the one closest to what was true. It became mine, she said simply. Somewhere along the way. I don't know exactly when. Ethan held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he nodded, once the small nod of a man who has heard something and is keeping it somewhere careful. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Clara went to her room. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark and listened to the Wyoming night and thought about the word she hadn't used but had been close to: home. The way the ranch had begun to feel like one without her deciding it should. She had not let herself use the word yet. There were still too many things unsettled. But she noticed it, the way you notice a light from a window when you've been walking in the dark. The fever arrived 9 days later. It did not announce itself. That was the thing about sickness in the territory. It didn't knock. It was simply not there. And then it was, spreading the way fire spreads through dry grass, finding its path along the lines of contact that towns create naturally: the well, the store, the schoolhouse, the church steps on Sunday morning. The first cases were 3 children on the east side of town, then the miller's wife, then 2 of the Breckenridge sons. Within a week, Red Hollow had 12 confirmed cases and a quality of fear running underneath the ordinary surface of daily life. Not panic, not yet, but the tight jaw, quick walk, avoid the crowd fear of people who have seen what fever can do in an isolated community with limited options. Clara heard about it on her Tuesday run. Frank Delaney at the general store told her in a low voice while he was counting her flour, the way people tell you things they don't want overheard. "Doc Hennessy is doing what he can," he said, "but he's one man, and he's 63, and his knees are bad." "What kind of fever?" Clara asked. Frank looked at her. "The bad kind," he said, which was not technically a medical designation, but was accurate in the way that mattered. She drove back to the ranch thinking. She had nursing experience, not formal, not trained, but accumulated. During the war years in Ohio, when Thomas was still alive and the farm was still running, she had helped at the church hall where they received wounded men traveling home. She had done it for 3 winters, learning as she went, acquiring the unsentimental practicality that nursing requires. She knew how to bring a fever down. She knew which remedies helped and which were theatrical. She knew how to keep someone hydrated when they couldn't hold water, and she knew the particular rhythm of a fever's peak, the way it climbed and then, if you were lucky, finally broke. She talked to Ethan that evening. She told him what she was considering. He was quiet for a long moment. "It's dangerous," he said. "I know. You could take it yourself." "That's possible." "Clara," he stopped, started again. "I'm not going to tell you not to, but I want you to understand what you're walking into." "I've walked into it before," she said. "I know what it looks like." He looked at her across the table. Lily was in bed. The lamp between them made the kitchen feel closer than it was, the shadows gathering the room inward. "Tell me what you need," he said. That was all. Not an argument, not an attempt to talk her out of it. Just, "Tell me what you need." Clara noted it, the weight of it, the particular quality of a man who trusted her judgment even when it frightened him. "Clean cloth," she said. "Lots of it. Willow bark. I'll need to check what the store has. Broth supplies. Vinegar for the compresses," she thought. "And someone to watch Lily while I'm in town." "I'll watch her," Ethan said, "and I'll come with you in the mornings to carry supplies. We can work shifts. You have the ranch. The ranch will manage a few weeks without me running every inch of it." His tone didn't leave room for argument. "I'm not sending you into a sick town alone." Clara looked at him. "All right," she said. They sat with that settled between them, and after a moment Lily's voice came from the top of the stairs. "I'm not asleep, and I can hear everything." Ethan looked at the ceiling. "Lily, is Clara going to help the sick people?" "Yes," Clara said. A pause from the stairs. "Can I help?" "No," Ethan said. "Why?" "Lily." His voice, gentle but absolute. Another pause. Then small footsteps retreating and the soft sound of a door. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at the lamp. "She'll ask again in the morning," she said. "I know," he said. "She always does." What Clara found in Red Hollow the next morning was worse than she had expected and better organized than she'd feared. Doc Hennessy, whatever his bad knees, had established a rough system. 3 houses on the East Block had been designated for the sick, healthy family members moved out, Patients moved in together so treatment could be concentrated. It was sensible. It was also badly understaffed, the doctor alone managing 12 patients with the sporadic help of 2 women from the congregation who were both visibly frightened and therefore less useful than they might have been. He looked at Clara when she arrived with her supplies, and Ethan behind her with a second load. He looked at her for a moment in the way of a man recalculating something. "You have nursing experience," he said. "Not a question." "3 winters," she said. "Not trained, practical." "Practical is what I need," he said, and turned back to his patients. She started with the worst cases first, which was the method she had learned made the most difference. Address the most critical, stabilize them, then move to the less severe. The worst were 2 of the children, a boy of 8 named James Holloway, and a girl of 5 she didn't know. Both were deep in the fever's grip, the hot, dry heat of it that meant the body was fighting hard. She worked compresses, got broth into them in small amounts, kept the cloths cool and changed them regularly. It was not complicated work. It was relentless work. Ethan carried water. He was better at it than she might have expected. He didn't flinch from the sickness the way some men didn't hold himself apart from it. He carried what needed carrying, did what she asked without requiring explanation, and when she sent him to get more willow bark from the store, he came back in 20 minutes with that, and camphor, and a second clean bucket she hadn't asked for but needed. By noon they had found a rhythm. Around midday, Mrs. Holloway appeared at the door of the sick house. She was the woman who had said Clara was trying to replace Lily's mother, who had whispered to Lily about the stray cat. She stood in the doorway and looked at Clara working over her son, the compress on his forehead, the careful spoonfuls of broth, and her face went through something complicated and private that Clara did not watch because it wasn't hers to see. "What can I do?" Mrs. Holloway said. Clara looked up. "Can you boil water?" "Of course." "There's a pot in the back kitchen. Keep it going. I'll need it every hour." She turned back to James. "And if you can hold him still while I change this compress, that would help. He fights it when the fever's high." Mrs. Holloway came in and held her son's shoulders, and she did not say anything about strays or replacement or charitable arrangements, and Clara did not bring any of it up because the present moment did not require the past, and she had learned that some reconciliations happened in the doing rather than the saying. The days found their shape. Morning. Clara and Ethan arrived early. Ethan managed supplies and heavy work. Clara moved between patients, assessing, treating, adjusting. Doc Hennessy handled the more complex medical decisions. The women who had been helping before, steadier now that there were more people, the fear manageable when it was shared, took on the tasks Clara assigned them without the earlier reluctance. Victor Hale was in town through all of it. Clara saw him twice, on the 2nd day and then the 4th. He did not offer to help. He stayed at the Copper Nail and watched from a careful distance, and Clara noted that his careful distance was noted by others. She could see it in the way Frank Delaney looked across the street on the 3rd afternoon, the way his mouth pressed together briefly before he went back to what he was doing. Some things reveal character in the absence of action as clearly as any action could. The boy James broke on the 4th day, the fever cresting and then coming down, the particular change in his color and breathing that meant the worst had passed. Clara sat beside him for an hour making certain, and when he opened his eyes and asked for water, she felt the specific clean satisfaction of someone who has fought for something and found the ground still holding. She was outside getting air when Ethan found her. He brought coffee from somewhere, she didn't ask where, and stood beside her while she drank it and looked at the street, the ordinary mid-morning life of Red Hollow proceeding around the edges of the crisis. "James is better," she said. "I heard." He looked at her, sideways, careful. "You need to sleep." "Tonight," she said. "There's still the Breckenridge boy I'm worried about." "I know, but you need to eat something first. You haven't—" "Ethan." She looked at him. "I'm managing." "You're managing everyone else," he said. "That's not the same thing." She looked at him. He was right, and she knew it, and the knowing of it was the particular kind of irritating that comes from being told a true thing you've been avoiding. She drank the coffee. He produced from somewhere in the vicinity of his coat pocket a biscuit wrapped in cloth. She looked at it. "Lily made them," he said. This morning. She said to make sure you ate one. Clara took the biscuit. It was slightly overcooked on the bottom. Lily had been doing the bottom-burning thing less often lately, but under distraction, it returned. She ate it anyway. How is she? Clara asked. Worried about you, Ethan said. Doing her reading lessons to have something to do with the worry. A pause. She set a place for you at the table this morning even though you weren't there. Clara looked down at the cloth the biscuit had come in. She folded it carefully, a thing to do with her hands. Tell her the boy James is better, she said. That'll help. I will. He looked out at the street. The Alderson family wants to help. And the Pembertons. I told them to come tomorrow, bring supplies, take a shift on the water carrying. The Aldersons, Claire said. Sam Alderson has the property east of yours. Yes, she looked at him. Did you talk to him about the creek? Something shifted in Ethan's expression. We talked, he said. Turns out the Alderson South pasture also runs off the same upstream flow. He hadn't connected what Hale's claim would mean until I laid it out. He paused. He's angry. Good, Claire said. Angry neighbors with standing are more useful than a lone rancher with a legal argument. Ethan looked at her with that expression he had. The one she'd learned meant he was thinking something he hadn't decided yet whether to say. I wrote to the Cheyenne lawyer 2 days ago, he said. He wrote back yesterday. He says with Alderson's property involved, the claim becomes a public nuisance matter, not just a private dispute. The legal basis shifts considerably. And Hale probably knows that, Ethan said, which means he'll move faster than I expected, try to establish presence on the land before the legal challenge can be filed. Clara thought about this. She thought about Victor Hale at the Copper Nail, watching from a careful distance while the town fought its fever. She thought about the chess her father had taught her, the lesson about the opponent who made you feel like you were choosing. He'll come to you directly soon, she said. He'll offer to settle. Terms that seem reasonable on the surface and disadvantage you underneath. Ethan looked at her. You sound certain. I've been watching how he moves. She handed him back the cloth. When he comes, don't decide anything on the day. Tell him you need a week. Use the week. All right. He folded the cloth and put it back in his pocket. Clara, when this is over, he stopped. She waited. When this is over, he said again, and then shook his head slightly as if the sentence had not come out the way he'd built it in his head. Never mind. Go check on the Breckenridge boy. All right, she said, though she noted it. The unfinished sentence, the way he'd pulled it back. She noted it and filed it in the same careful place she'd been filing other things. The accumulation of small truths that didn't have names yet, but were adding up to something. Go check. On the 6th day, Lily got sick. Clara knew it before anyone told her. She knew it because Ethan arrived that morning earlier than usual, and he was moving differently. The controlled efficiency of the previous days stripped away, replaced by the barely contained urgency of a man who is frightened and trying not to show it because showing it will make it worse. How long? Clara said immediately. She woke in the night with the heat in her. His voice was steady, barely. I sat with her until morning. She doesn't look right. Clara was already gathering what she needed. Has she had water? Some. She didn't want it. She needs it whether she wants it or not. She looked at him. The fear in his face was not the controlled, accessible fear of the previous days. This was the raw kind, the kind that had a specific shape and a specific name, the fear of a man who had already lost one person he loved and was looking at the possibility of losing another. Ethan, I need you to be steady right now. He looked at her. I know. Not for me, she said. For her. She needs to see steady when she opens her eyes. His jaw set. He nodded. Tell me what to do. They worked together. The 2-hour drive back to the ranch. Clara in the back of the wagon with Lily, who was smaller in the grip of sickness than she ever seemed in health, her dark hair damp against her face and her amber eyes glassy and confused. She reached for Clara's hand and held it without speaking, and Clara held it back and monitored her breathing and kept her talking in small doses to track the coherence of her thoughts. The ranch room was better than the sick houses in town, quieter, more familiar to Lily, with the particular comfort of a child's own space. Clara set up what she needed, sent Ethan to boil water, and began the same deliberate work she'd been doing in town for 6 days. The compresses, the small amounts of water, again and again. The willow bark tea, which Lily hated the taste of and drank anyway when Clara told her it was necessary, with the resigned compliance of a sick child who knows she is in someone else's hands. "Am I going to be all right?" Lily asked on the first evening. Her voice was rough and smaller than usual, the certainty she normally carried with it temporarily absent. Clara looked at her. She could have said yes reflexively, the way adults do, the comfort lie that children see through anyway. She didn't. "You're sick," she said. "I'm going to take care of you. That's what I know for sure right now." Lily considered this. "You didn't say yes." "I didn't say no either." Another pause. "Will you stay?" "I'm not going anywhere," Clara said. "Even at night?" "Even at night." Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "Papa won't say it, but he's really scared." "I know," Clara said. "You're not scared." "I'm a little scared," Claire said, which was true. "But being scared and doing the work aren't the same thing. You can be both." Lily seemed to find this acceptable. She closed her eyes. Clara changed the compress on her forehead and sat in the chair she had pulled to the bedside, and she listened to Lily's breathing. Too fast, too shallow, but there. And outside the window, the Wyoming night came on in its usual way, indifferent and vast and full of the kind of silence that made whatever happened inside a room feel both very small and very important. Ethan appeared in the doorway around 9. He had done what needed doing outside and had run out of things to do and was standing there with his hands at his sides and his face showing more than he probably wanted it to. "Sit down," Clara said quietly. "There's a chair on the other side." He came in and sat. Lily was asleep, her breathing steadier in sleep, her face flushed, but not the dangerous dry heat flush of the worst cases. Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Clara across the bed between them. "She asked for you first," he said, "when she woke in the night, before she called for me." His voice was quiet, no accusation in it, just the plain statement of something that had happened. "She said your name." Clara looked at Lily's sleeping face, the damp hair, the small scar on her chin. "I'm here," she said. "That's all that matters right now." Ethan looked down at his hands. "I know I'm not easy," he said. "I've been told that enough times that I believe it." He paused. "But whatever this is, what you've built here, with her, with the house, I don't know what we'd have done without it, without you." He looked up. "I don't know what I'd have done." The lamp on the nightstand was low, the room held in its warm, small light. Outside, something moved across the yard. A horse shifting in the barn, some small wind in the grass. Clara looked at him. This man who kept his feelings in the smallest possible containers and opened them only when he had no other option. This man whose daughter had walked up to a stranger on a train platform on the strength of a dream and had, as it turned out, known something he hadn't yet. "She's going to be all right," Clara said, and this time she said it not as a comfort lie, but as a decision, as the thing she was going to make true through the next hours and days by sheer unwillingness to let it be otherwise. Ethan held her gaze. He did not say he was glad she was here, or thank you, or any of the things the moment might have called for. He just looked at her with that direct, unguarded look she had not seen on him before, the look of a man who has stopped managing the distance between himself and another person. They sat on either side of Lily through the night, taking turns dozing in the chair, swapping positions when one of them needed to stretch. The fever climbed in the small hours before dawn, the way it always did, the last worst push before it turned, and Clara sat forward and worked steadily through it, cool cloths and quiet words and the particular focus of someone who has decided the outcome before the outcome has been decided. Ethan was awake across the bed. He didn't speak. He watched Clara work, and his face was something she couldn't read and something she didn't need to read because some presences communicate more than any expression could. The fever broke at first light. She felt it before she saw it, the change in Lily's skin, the slight give from dry heat to something cooler and damp. Lily's breathing slowed and deepened. The flush in her face softened. She made a small sound in her sleep, something close to a sigh, the sound of a body finally releasing what it had been fighting. Clara sat back in her chair. Ethan looked at his daughter's face. He looked at it for a long time, his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped and his eyes doing something that he kept private by simply not moving, not blinking, just looking at his daughter who was still here and breathing and going to be all right. After a while, he looked up at Clara. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed saying, or rather there was too much, and none of it could fit into a sentence at that hour, in that room, in the fragile aftermath of the night they'd just come through. The sun came through the window. Lily slept on. Clara became aware, slowly and without particular drama, that she was exhausted in every layer she possessed, bone-tired, soul-tired, the kind of tired that is also, underneath it, a kind of relief. She was still here. They were still here. Outside, Red Hollow was waking up, moving through its ordinary morning, full of people who had not yet learned that the crisis was turning, that children were opening their eyes and asking for water, that the town would survive what had hit it. They would learn it today, and it would change the story they told about this time. And in that story, Clara suspected, certain things would be different than they had been before. What people owe each other. What a stranger is and when she stops being one. She would deal with all of that when she had slept. She would deal with Victor Hale's settlement offer, which she was now certain was coming, and the creek, and the lawyer in Cheyenne, and the neighbors who were angry and useful and needed organizing. But those were the next hours. This hour was this. She set down the cloth she'd been holding and pressed her hands flat on her thighs and let herself sit in the quiet of the room where Lily Carter was sleeping peacefully and where Ethan Carter was still looking at Clara with that open, unguarded look that meant whatever wall had been between them for 3 months had come down somewhere in the dark, and neither of them had noticed the exact moment it fell. Lily slept for most of that first day, waking in short intervals to drink water and then sliding back under, her body doing what bodies do after a fever breaks, taking back the rest it had been denied. Clara slept too, in her own room, for 4 hours in the afternoon, the hard, flat sleep of complete depletion. When she woke, the light had changed and she could hear Ethan moving in the kitchen below. The particular sounds of a man attempting to cook who does not cook often. Cautious, slightly too much cabinet opening, the clank of a pot being set down with uncertainty about whether it was the right pot. She washed her face and went downstairs. He had made soup. It was not a confident soup. The broth was thin, and the vegetables were cut in the uneven shapes of someone who doesn't cook regularly and thinks about each piece separately rather than moving through the whole. But it was soup, recognizable as such, and he had made enough for 3. He looked at her when she came in. "You slept." 4 hours, she said. "It's enough." "It isn't enough," he said. "But I'll accept it." He nodded toward the pot. "It's probably not what you'd have made." "It doesn't need to be what I'd have made," she said. "It needs to be soup." She tasted it. It needed salt in another 20 minutes and possibly an apology to the vegetables, but it was hot and there was enough of it, and she was hungry enough that none of that mattered. She told him it was good, which was not quite accurate, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who knows he is being handled kindly and decides to accept it anyway. They took a bowl up to Lily together. She was awake, propped against her pillow, looking more like herself than she had in 2 days. The glassiness gone from her eyes, replaced by the alert observational quality that was her natural state. She ate most of the soup without complaint, which told Clara more about her recovery than any temperature check could have. "It needs salt," Lily said about the soup. Ethan looked at the ceiling briefly. "It's good, Papa," Lily added in the tone of someone who has learned to add this after delivering criticism. "Just needs salt." "Thank you," Ethan said in the tone of someone who will be adding salt in the future. Clara stood at the foot of the bed watching this exchange. The small, ordinary, familial irritation of it, the way Lily looked between them as if checking that they were both still there and accounted for. And she felt something she didn't try to name, just felt it, the way you feel the change in temperature when you step from cold air into a warm room. Present tense. Actual. Lily finished the soup and handed back the bowl and looked at Clara with the direct, total gaze that Clara had learned was the sign that something considered was coming. "Are you going to stay?" Lily said. Clara looked at her. I'm not going anywhere tonight. That's not what I mean, Lily said. The room was quiet for a moment. Ethan had gone very still in the way he went still when something was happening that he had not decided yet how to respond to. Lily, he said, with the particular parental intonation that means, not right now. Why not right now? Lily said. I almost died. You had a fever, Ethan said. You didn't almost die. It felt like almost dying. Lily looked at Clara again, the small face utterly serious. I thought about what I wanted, and I want to say it. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. Then say it, she said. Lily took a breath. I want you to stay. Not for work. Not because you have nowhere to go, because you have somewhere to go. You could go anywhere, I think. She paused. I want you to stay because I want you here. Because this house is better. Because Papa is better, even if he doesn't say so. She looked at her father briefly. He is, Papa. It's true. Then back to Clara. I know you're not my mama. I know that. But I picked you at the station and I was right about you, and I'd like to keep you. The verb hit Clara somewhere she hadn't expected. Not have you. Not keep you here. Keep you. The way you keep something that matters to you. Something you have decided is yours to protect. She looked at this child, almost 7, older than she had any right to be, fierce and logical and occasionally impossible. And the long-braced thing that had been holding itself in place since Cincinnati, since the train, since the platform in the burning sun where nobody came, finally, fully, let go. She did not cry. She was not a woman who cried easily or often, but her throat closed around something and she sat with it for a moment before she trusted herself to speak. I'd like to stay, she said, if that's all right with everyone. She looked at Ethan when she said everyone. He was looking back at her. The open, unguarded look that had appeared in the sick room at dawn was still there, undisguised, as if he had decided somewhere in the night that managing the distance was more effort than it was worth. It's more than all right, he said. Lily settled back against her pillow with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan has worked out. Good, she said. Now I'm going to sleep again. Victor Hale's settlement offer arrived 3 days later, delivered by a man Clara didn't know, who rode out from town with a sealed envelope, and the careful neutrality of someone who is being paid to carry a message and would prefer not to know its contents. Ethan read it at the kitchen table. His face did the thing it did when he was thinking hard, jaw set, eyes moving over the page without expression. He finished and set the letter down and looked at it for a moment. He's offering to sell back the Greer parcel, he said, at a price. How much? He said the number. It was roughly double what the parcel was worth, calculated, Clara suspected, to be just barely within the range of what a man in Ethan's position could manage if he sold other things. Painful, but survivable. The offer of a man who wanted to win but was also reading the situation and making adjustments. He's heard about the Aldersons, Clara said. That would be my guess. Ethan looked up from the letter. If Alderson files alongside me, the legal costs spread and the timeline extends and Hale's position becomes considerably less certain. He wants this resolved before that happens. What did the Cheyenne lawyers say? That the joint filing is strong. He wants to move quickly. Clara looked at the letter. She thought about what she'd said to Ethan weeks ago. Don't decide on the day. Use the week. But this was different from what she'd anticipated then. She had expected Hale to come to Ethan directly, in person, with the persuasive performance she knew him capable of. A letter was colder, more transactional. It meant he was cutting his losses, not doubling down. He's nervous, she said. Ethan looked at her. What makes you say that? He sent a letter instead of coming himself. She picked up the envelope, looked at the hand on the outside. Ethan's name in a careful, controlled script. When he wants something badly, he comes in person. He came to the ranch in person. He came to town in person. A letter means he's recalculating whether this is worth what it'll cost him. She set the envelope down. He might take less. Ethan looked at the letter again. The lawyer would know better than I would how to negotiate the price. Then write to the lawyer today, Clara said. Tell him you received the offer. Tell him not to respond immediately. Let Hale wait a few days and wonder what you're doing. Ethan looked at her, The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something adjacent. "You know," he said, "Tom Reeder asked me last week whether it was true I'd hired a woman to manage my books." "What did you say?" "I said it was more accurate that she managed everything and I did what I was told." He picked up the letter. "I wasn't entirely joking." Clara took the letter from him. "Write to the lawyer," she said. "I'll help you draft it." They worked on it together at the kitchen table, Clara reading the legal offer and identifying the specific language that most benefited Hale's position, Ethan translating her observations into terms the Cheyenne lawyer could use. It took 2 hours. When they finished, the letter was precise, detailed, and made a counterargument that Clara thought was solid enough to give Hale's people a genuine problem. When it was sealed and ready, Ethan sat back and looked at her across the table. "You've done this before," he said. "I told you I learned accounts from a dry goods man," she said. "His supplier contracts were disputed twice while I worked for him. I sat in on both negotiations." She paused. "I was supposed to be there to take notes. But I also had opinions." She collected the papers into a neat stack. "He learned to let me have them." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "After this is settled, the legal business." He stopped, and she recognized the pattern now. The sentence he built and then pulled back. She had learned to wait for the second attempt. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want to do it properly. Not at the kitchen table with letters about water rights." He looked at the table, then at her. "Can you give me a few days?" Clara looked at him steadily. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, which was what she had told Lily and was more true now than it had been then. The thing about small towns, the thing people who live in them understand and people who don't live in them tend to underestimate, is that they correct themselves eventually. Not quickly, not without resistance. But eventually the evidence accumulates past the point where the story a community has been telling can hold its original shape, and it shifts. And when it shifts in the way of all collective things. All at once, as if everyone decided simultaneously, with no one willing to admit they were among the last to change their mind. The fever had been the turning point. Clara knew this not because anyone said it directly. Red Hollow was not a town that apologized directly, but because of the quality of the looks she received when she went in to help Doc Hennessy with the final recovering patients. Not the watchful, assessing looks of the previous 2 months. Something different, the slightly uncomfortable acknowledgement of people who have needed to revise an opinion they'd invested in. Mrs. Holloway was the first to say something explicit, which Clara hadn't expected. She came to the doorway of the sick house on the morning James was well enough to go home, and she said without preamble, "I said things that weren't fair, about you, early on." She said it the way people say things they've been working up to for a while and say quickly once they start, before they can talk themselves out of it. "I was wrong to." Clara looked at her. She could have deflected, told her it was fine, it didn't matter, let the woman off easily. She didn't, because she had never been good at performing absolution she didn't feel, and because Mrs. Holloway deserved the weight of a real response more than the comfort of a light one. "Thank you for saying so," Clara said, "and for holding James still when he needed it. That mattered." Mrs. Holloway nodded. Something in her face settled, not quite relief, but the expression of a person who has put down something they were carrying. The other shifts were smaller. Frank Delaney began setting aside the supplies she needed without being asked, the list anticipated rather than consulted. The 2 women who had helped at the sick house began greeting her by name in the street. Sam Alderson, on the day he and Ethan rode into the land office together to file the joint challenge to Hale's claim, tipped his hat to Clara where she waited with the wagon, a small gesture that, in its context, was not small at all. Hale left town 10 days after his letter. Clara saw him leave from the window of the general store. The same horse, the same deliberate pace, but the direction reversed, heading north out of Red Hollow, with no announcement and no audience. The absence of an audience was the detail that told her the most. Victor Hale without an audience was Victor Hale without a performance, which meant Victor Hale without a plan. He would go somewhere else and find another angle and approach another situation with the same patient, architectural patience he had brought to this one. She did not think he was a changed man. She thought he was a man who had encountered a situation that turned out to be more complicated than his model of it, and had decided his time was better spent elsewhere. That was sufficient. She did not need him to be destroyed or humbled. She needed him to be gone, and he was gone. The land office confirmed the joint challenge filing on a Thursday. The Cheyenne lawyer wrote that Hale's representative had contacted him about the counteroffer 2 days prior and suggested the negotiation was moving in a useful direction. He expected resolution within 60 days. Ethan told her this at supper, with Lily between them eating with her usual focus. 60 days, Clara said. He thinks it could be faster. Hale's people aren't interested in a long fight. Lily looked up. Is it over? Getting there, Ethan said. Good. She went back to her food. I want things to be boring for a while. Clara looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. Something moved between them in that look. Acknowledgement, warmth, the particular humor of two people who find the same thing funny without having to say what it is. Lily, between them, missed it entirely, which was probably appropriate. He asked her on a Sunday, not with advanced ceremony or obvious preparation. It was not that kind of asking from that kind of man. They had been to the south pasture that morning, walking the fence line that ran along the creek, which was still running clear and full and in no immediate danger given the challenge proceeding through the proper channels. It was early October by then, the Wyoming autumn doing what autumn did here. Cold in the mornings, gold in the light, the grass gone dry and pale and still beautiful in the way things are beautiful when they're finishing. They were walking back toward the house when he stopped. She stopped too and turned, and he was standing a few feet behind her on the path with his hat in his hands, turning it by the brim in the way she had come to recognize as the physical expression of something he was working out how to say. I practiced this, he said. I want you to know I practiced it, and I still can't make it come out right. Clara looked at him. Then say it wrong. He looked up from the hat. I want you to stay, he said, not as an employee, not because Lily wants you here, though she does, and not because the house runs better with you in it, though it does. He paused. I want you to stay because I spent 2 years after Margaret thinking that what I had was the shape of the rest of my life, just the ranch and Lily and the work and getting through. And then you got off a train, and I brought you home because my daughter asked me to, and somewhere in the last 4 months what I thought was the whole of my life turned out to be only part of it. He stopped. That's not an eloquent way to say it. It's an accurate way to say it, Clara said. Accurate is better. He reached into the pocket of his coat. What he brought out was not a jeweler's box. It was a ring, simple, silver, clearly handmade, not recently, with the wear of something that had existed for some time and been kept. He held it out, and she looked at it, and then at him. It was my grandmother's, he said. She was a practical woman. She would have liked you. He paused. I think you'd have found each other exhausting, and also indispensable, which in my experience is what real regard looks like. Clara looked at the ring. She thought about the train from Cincinnati, the platform, the burning sun, the station master's face when he said William Pratt had left town. She thought about Lily walking out of the crowd with those amber eyes and that absolute certainty. She thought about the curtains she had mended, the cabinet hinges she had tightened, the nights at the sick house and the morning the fever broke, and the way Ethan had looked at her across Lily's bed in the first light with everything unguarded. She was 34 years old. She had buried a husband and a farm and a life she'd built piece by piece and then watched disassemble. She had crossed several states on a promise that turned out to be nothing, and she had arrived in a town that didn't want her, and she had stayed anyway, not because she was brave in any theatrical sense, but because the alternative was giving up, and she had never found giving up a particularly useful option. This was not the life she had planned. It was something she hadn't planned at all, which was perhaps the point. She took the ring. Yes, she said, in the simple, direct way she said most things. I'll stay. He put the ring on her finger. It fit him perfectly, slightly loose, in the way of a thing made for someone else. But that felt appropriate somehow, not a perfect fit inherited from another life, a thing that would become hers through time and use. He looked at her hand and then at her face. He was not a demonstrative man, and the moment was not a dramatic one. No grand landscape backdrop, no orchestrated light. Just a dirt path between a fence line and a ranch house, the two of them in their work coats, the grass pale around them, and the sky enormous and indifferent and very blue. He kissed her once, briefly, the kind of kiss that is more like a statement than a performance. Then he looked at her, and she looked at him, and they turned and walked back toward the house together. Doug. Lily saw the ring before they reached the porch. She was sitting on the top step with her book open on her knees, which was where she spent Sunday mornings, and she looked up when they came through the gate, and her eyes went immediately to Clara's hand with the unerring accuracy of a child who has been thinking about this specific outcome for approximately 4 months. She closed the book. She stood up. She looked between them. Finally, she said. Ethan stopped. Lily, I've been waiting since October, she said, which was 3 weeks, but the tone was of someone who had been waiting considerably longer than that. It's still October, Clara said. Late October, Lily said, with dignity. She came down the steps and took Clara's hand, the left one, the one with the ring, and looked at it with the solemn attention of an art critic assessing a significant work. Then she looked up at Clara. Does it fit? It's a little loose, Clara said. We can fix that, Lily said, and went back up the steps and into the house, as if the matter were administrative and simply required attention. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ethan. She'll be impossible for a week, he said. She's always impossible, Clara said. She comes by it naturally. Ethan made the sound that was not quite a laugh, but had become, over 4 months, something she looked forward to hearing. They went inside. The wedding was small, which suited everyone involved. They married in December, on a Friday, at the county courthouse in the next town over. Ethan, Clara, Lily, Sam Alderson, and his wife as witnesses, and Doc Hennessy, who drove 2 hours because, as he put it, he had invested too much in Clara's continued presence in the territory to miss the occasion. The courthouse steps were cold, and the wind was doing what Wyoming wind does in December, which is whatever it wants. And Lily held a small bunch of dried winter flowers she had made herself, with the slightly crooked craftsmanship of someone who has never made flowers from dried stems before, and will do better next time. The ceremony was brief and legally exact. The judge, a man of 60-something with the weathered economy of words that comes from decades of official proceedings, read what needed to be read and asked what needed to be asked. Ethan said yes. Clara said yes. The ring was already on her finger where it had been sitting, slightly loose, for 6 weeks. Afterward, they stood on the cold steps in the wind, and Sam Alderson shook Ethan's hand, and his wife embraced Clara with the warmth of a woman who has decided someone is worth embracing and does it fully. Doc Hennessy pressed a bottle of something into Ethan's hands and told him it was from the Holloways, which made Clara look up. She came to me, the doctor said she wanted to do something and didn't know what to do. I told her the good whiskey was a start. He looked at Clara with the dry affection of someone who has watched a situation develop from close range. You changed this town, whether it deserves the credit of being changed by you or not. The town changed itself, Clara said. I just gave it something to change in response to. That's a generous interpretation, he said. I have my moments. Lily had been standing through all of this at Clara's side, holding the slightly crooked dried flowers, watching the adult proceedings with her usual total attention. On the drive home, in the wagon with the blankets pulled up against the cold, she sat between Ethan and Clara and said nothing for a long time, which for Lily was unusual enough that both adults noticed it. What are you thinking? Clara asked. Lily considered. I was thinking about how I knew, she said, at the station, when I saw you. What did it feel like? Clara asked. When you saw me? Lily thought about this with the seriousness she brought to questions that mattered. Like remembering something I hadn't known yet, she said finally. Like when you know a word is on the tip of your tongue, and then it comes. Except it was a person instead of a word. Clara put her arm around Lily. The girl leaned into her without ceremony, the way she always did with the easy confidence of someone who has never once doubted she would be received. I'm glad you came to the station, Clara said. I had to, Lily said simply. You were sitting by yourself. The Creek dispute resolved in January, 63 days after filing. Hale's representative agreed to a price that was fair rather than punishing. The lawyer called it a clean outcome, which, in legal terms, meant everyone got less than they wanted and more than they feared. The Greer parcel reverted, the water rights clarified, the south pasture secured. Ethan paid the legal fees and the agreed price, and came home that evening with the particular quality of a man who has put down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to walk without it. Clara had supper on the stove. Lily was doing her reading at the table, working through a new chapter in the natural history book that she had been discussing at mealtimes with the authority of a junior professor. Ethan sat down, took the coffee she put in front of him, and said, "It's done." "Good," Clara said. "Clean outcome," he said. The lawyer's words. "Accurate," she said. He looked at the table, then at her. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said. "For the ranch. There are some things I've been putting off. The north fence needs rebuilding, the barn roof before spring." He paused. "I'd like your opinion on a few things, if you're willing." Clara sat down across from him. "I'm willing." Lily looked up from her book. "Can I have an opinion too?" "On the barn roof?" Ethan said. "On whatever you're deciding," Lily said. "I live here also." Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ethan. The unspoken conversation of two people who have learned to communicate in the register above words. The small nod, the slight angle of the head, the shared acknowledgement of something that is funny and true and theirs. "You can have an opinion," Ethan said. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to her book. There's a thing people say about belonging, that you find it as if it exists somewhere out in the world already made, waiting to be discovered. Clara Whitmore had believed this once. She had looked for it in the right circumstances, the right town, the right arrangement, the right promise from the right man. She had crossed states in pursuit of it. She had stood on a platform in the burning sun watching the train pull away and thought she had missed it, that it had been on the train or had never existed, or had existed once, and she had used it up. What she understood now, not as a lesson she had decided to learn, but as something that had accumulated in her through the ordinary days of an ordinary life she had not planned, was that belonging is not found. It is made. It is made in the cabinet hinges you tighten and the compresses you change at 2 a.m, and the reading lessons that become, somewhere around lesson 12, the thing a child reaches for first when she is frightened. It is made in the kitchen at 6 a.m, and the wagon rides to town in the silence between two people that gradually changes its quality from caution to trust. It is made imperfectly, with friction, with the specific human difficulty of people who are not easy and have not always made good choices and carry their histories with them the way everyone does, not as baggage to be shed, but as the actual substance of who they are, which cannot be separated from them without taking something essential. Clara Carter. She had been using the name for 6 weeks, and it still occasionally surprised her, the way her own reflection surprises you when you catch it unexpectedly. Sat at the kitchen table on an ordinary evening in January, with her husband across from her and her daughter beside her, and the Wyoming dark pressed against the windows and the stove warm and the lamp low. And she was not happy in the theatrical, excessive sense she had sometimes imagined happiness in harder years. She was something more durable than happy. She was in the right place, doing real work, with people who had chosen her as she had chosen them. That, she had come to understand, was the whole of it, not the absence of difficulty or loss or the ordinary grinding friction of human life. Just the knowledge that you are in the right place and you earned your way there. And the people beside you know who you are and have decided that is enough. And you have decided the same about them. Lily looked up from her book. "Clara. Did you know the Siberian tiger can swim for miles?" "I did not know that." "They're very large," Lily said, with the gravity of someone imparting significant information. "And not friendly." "Most large things aren't," Clara said. Lily considered this. "You're not large," she said, "and you're friendly." "Thank you," Clara said. "I think." Ethan, across the table, made the sound that was not quite a laugh, but had become, over the months of ordinary evenings just like this one, the sound she associated with home. She had arrived in Red Hollow with a worn suitcase and $14 and a promise that turned out to be nothing. She had left the station with the child's hand in hers and no certainty of anything. She had built the rest herself, one ordinary day at a time. That was the truth of it, and it was enough.